Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're going all digital. We're diving into the PlayStation 5 Digital Edition. You know that moment when you're at the store, controller in hand, and you're trying to decide discs or no discs? Well, we're here to help you make that choice. We've got a really in-depth review from TechWise Corner, and to help me break it all down, we've got our tech expert, who always knows how to make sense of all these gaming trends. All right, so first impressions. Right off the bat, the digital edition, it's definitely slimmer, more symmetrical than the regular PS5. This is no disc drive. Honestly, it looks pretty slick.
Yeah.
What do you think about the aesthetics?
Oh, it's sleek for sure. It kind of fits into this trend, right? Like all these tech gadgets going all digital, minimalist, like you'd see with certain tablets and laptops these days.
Right, yeah. Though I gotta say, it's still a pretty big console. Like, is this thing gonna fit on my entertainment stand?
Yeah, that's a good point. TechWise Corner definitely mentions that it still takes up a decent amount of space, no matter if you put it vertically or horizontally. But I think the design, it's modern. It'll fit in with most setups.
Okay, so let's get to the heart of it, the performance. Now, both PS5 versions, they pack that same powerful hardware. We're talking that super fast SSD, the stunning 4K visuals, and that mind-blowing 3D audio. TechWise Corner, they raved about it. They even compared the performance to like high-end gaming PCs. You know what, I'm really curious about that SSD. I keep hearing it's a total game changer.
Oh, it absolutely is.
Yeah.
Imagine, right, you're playing Horizon Forbidden West, and you can jump between those huge detailed areas with, like, no loading screens.
Yeah.
That's what the SSD allows. It's not just, like, numbers on a spec sheet. It changes how games feel.
Wow, yeah. No more staring at those loading screens. Okay, so let's talk about this whole all-digital lifestyle. I mean, the convenience, downloading games instantly, that's super tempting. But what about when my internet's down? Or like, I'm pretty attached to my physical games, lending them to friends, selling them when I'm done. Can't do that with the digital edition, right?
Yeah, you're hitting on some key points there. TechWise Corner does mention internet outages being a problem with an all-digital console. And you're right, no more lending or reselling. It's a trade-off.
It makes you think about digital ownership, Like, do I really own a game if I just download it? What if the PlayStation Store just vanishes one day?
That's the big question, isn't it? And TechWise Corner brings that up too. It's something to consider. What happens to your game library down the line?
Feels like a whole new way of thinking about owning games. TechWise Corner even suggests this digital edition is part of a bigger plan by Sony, moving everyone towards subscriptions like PlayStation Plus.
Yeah, it's a good observation. Sony definitely benefits from that recurring revenue, right? It's a big shift for the whole industry. Devs, publishers, gamers, everybody.
Next up, the DualSense controller. The adaptive triggers and haptic feedback, they sound pretty amazing. TechWise Corner was really impressed. They talked about feeling the tension of a bowstring.
It's not just hype. Imagine you're playing Returnal, and you can feel the difference in that trigger resistance, between your normal weapon and the all-fire mode. That's the kind of detail the DualSense brings.
Whoa, that's wild. And it has a built-in mic and speaker too, right?
Yep. TechWise Corner sees this as part of, like, this move towards easier voice communication in gaming. Chatting with your teammates without needing a headset makes everything feel more connected and immersive.
Okay, so let's talk user interface. TechWise Corner said the redesigned PlayStation interface is really slick, way faster, and user-friendly than the old ones. What makes it so much better?
They really like the activity card system. So think about it. You're stuck on a puzzle or you just need a little help. Instead of leaving the game to search online, these cards pop up right in the game. Objectives, hints, progress tracking.
Oh, okay. That's actually really useful, especially for me. I hate having to look up a walkthrough. And we can't forget backwards compatibility. Playing most of our PS4 games on the PS5, that's huge.
Totally. TechWise Corner was all about that. That's a big win. Keep playing those games you already own. Adds a lot of value to the PS5, especially if you're upgrading.
All right, so here's the million-dollar question. That 825 GB SSD, it sounds massive. But with games taking up so much space these days, is it actually enough? Especially if you're all digital. I download a lot of games. Am I going to have to constantly be deleting stuff?
That's the catch, right?
Yeah.
TechWise Corner gets into the storage options. So you can expand the storage with a compatible SSD, use external drives for PS4 games, or just get real good at managing that game library, deleting what you're not playing.
Expanding the storage sounds like the best option, but how technical is that? Like, am I going to need a computer science degree to install a new SSD?
Yeah, it's a valid concern. TechWise Corner mentions it can be a bit tricky, not as easy as just plugging in an external hard drive. But they do say there are guides out there to help you through it, even official ones from Sony.
So to sum it all up, we've got sleek design, awesome performance, digital downloads, that cool DualSense controller, and of course, that big question mark about storage. A lot to think about.
Definitely. It all comes down to, how you play games and what you like. Do you like the convenience of digital, or are you like a collector of physical games?
Yeah, good point. Not a one-size-fits-all situation.
Exactly. TechWise Corner really emphasized that. There's no right answer. It's about what works best for you.
Okay, so let's say I'm kind of leaning towards the digital edition. What really stood out to TechWise Corner when they actually played games on it?
One thing they couldn't stop talking about was the sheer power of this console. And that's not just about bragging rights. That power means developers can finally build those crazy detailed worlds they've always wanted to. It's going to change what's possible in gaming.
Oh, that's exciting. Are there any examples from the review where you could really see that power?
They were blown away by Ratchet and Clank, ripped apart the visuals. They said it felt like playing an animated Pixar movie. The environments, the characters, everything was so detailed.
Whoa, I can't even imagine how immersive that would be. Speaking of immersive, they raved about the 3D audio too, right?
Oh, yeah. They said it was like being transported right into the game world. They specifically mentioned a scene in Demon Souls where they could tell exactly where an enemy was based on the sound of its footsteps.
That's insane. It sounds like the digital edition really does deliver that next-gen experience. But, as we talked about, there are some trade-offs.
Right. No disk drive, that's a big one. If you like buying used games, sharing with friends, watching Blu-rays, then the regular PS5 might be better.
And of course, there's the storage. Expandable, but definitely something to think about if you download a lot.
Absolutely. Got to be strategic about managing those games or think about getting more storage.
All right, so we covered a lot, but let's get back to that user experience. TechWise Corner was really positive about the new PlayStation interface. What were the highlights?
They said it's so much faster and easier to use than the old one. They loved the new control center, quick access to notification settings, all that, without leaving your game.
So it's all about making things smoother and more intuitive. What about those activity cards we talked about? Did TechWise Corner actually find them helpful?
Oh, they loved them. They said it's a game changer, especially if you like to complete games 100% or get stuck easily. No more alt-tabbing to look at walkthroughs. You stay in the game world.
That's a huge plus for me. I hate breaking the immersion to look for help online. And can't forget about backwards compatibility. That's huge for people with PS4 games.
Absolutely. Makes the transition to the PS5 so much smoother. Adds a lot of value. TechWise Corner really emphasized the benefits of that feature.
Okay, so we've talked about all the good stuff, but TechWise Corner had to have some criticisms, right? No console is perfect.
True. They were honest about some of the potential downsides. One thing they mentioned was the limited storage space. Like, out of that 825 GB SSD, only about 667 GB is actually usable for games.
Yeah, and with some games being like 100 GB or more, that can disappear pretty fast, especially if you're all digital.
Exactly. TechWise Corner really stressed how important it is to know about this and to plan ahead. They recommended being ready to manage your games carefully or to invest in extra storage.
So it sounds like the digital edition, it's powerful, immersive, but there are some drawbacks. No disk drive, limited storage, needing a good internet connection, all things to think about.
Exactly. TechWise Corner did a good job of explaining both the good and the bad. It really depends on what you like to do and how you play games.
Before we move on to some of the bigger ideas about the digital edition, I'm curious about those storage options. They talked about expanding the storage with those compatible SSDs, right?
Yeah. And they were really impressed with the speed of those SSDs. They said you can actually get the same performance as the console's internal SSD.
Oh, that's great. So you don't have to sacrifice speed for more storage. But didn't they also say installing one can be kind of tricky?
Yeah, they did. It's definitely more technical than just plugging in a hard drive. TechWise Corner recommended looking at Sony's official guides or maybe even getting professional help if you're not comfortable doing it yourself.
Okay, good to know. Sounds like expanding the storage is a good option, but it might not be for everybody.
Exactly. Definitely something to think about, based on how comfortable you are with tech stuff.
All right, so we've talked about the hardware, the design, how it works. Now I want to zoom out a bit. This PS5 digital edition, it feels like a big step towards the future of gaming, don't you think?
Absolutely. TechWise Corner even suggested that it could be like a stepping stone to an all cloud-based gaming experience.
That's what I was thinking. With PlayStation now getting more and more popular, do you think we'll get to a point where we don't even need consoles with storage anymore?
It's a really interesting question. TechWise Corner didn't say for sure, but they did say it's possible. especially as internet speeds keep getting better and cloud gaming technology improves.
It makes you wonder what's next for gaming, right? Will we all be streaming games from the cloud one day? Or will consoles like this digital edition just keep evolving alongside those streaming services?
Yeah, it's exciting to think about. Gaming's always changing, and the digital edition is right there leading the way.
Okay, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to touch on something else TechWise Corner mentioned internet connectivity. For a fully digital experience to work well, you need a really good internet connection, right?
Oh, absolutely. They talked about how important internet speed is,
Yeah.
especially for downloading those huge game files. And they even mentioned data caps, which can be a real problem for people with limited data.
It's almost like a hidden cost of going all digital, isn't it?
It can be, especially if you download a lot of those big AAA games every month.
So even though the digital edition is all about convenience, it still shows how important a strong internet connection is.
For sure. It reminds us that we're not completely free from, like, the physical world, even when we're gaming online.
That's such a good point. It's kind of a paradox.
Totally. It makes this whole conversation about the PS5 Digital Edition even more interesting.
Well said. All right, we've covered a lot in this first part of our deep dive. We talked about the design, the performance, what it's like to use, and even some of the bigger questions about digital gaming.
It's been a great discussion. I think our listeners have a much better idea of what the PS5 Digital Edition is all about now.
I agree. But we're not done yet. In the next part of our deep dive, we're going to go even deeper into the pros and cons of digital gaming, talk more about the potential for cloud gaming, and what all of this means for the future of the industry.
I can't wait.
Me too. So make sure you stay tuned for part 2, where we'll keep exploring the world of the PlayStation 5 Digital Edition.
You know, reading that TechWise Corner review, one thing that really jumped out at me was how they talked about this tech, like how it could change game development.
Yeah, they were pretty excited about it. What did they think was so game-changing?
They think the PS5's hardware, especially the SSD, it's going to let developers make these huge immersive game worlds like we've never seen before.
So it's not just about better graphics, it's about what those fast loading times allow them to do.
Exactly. Think about those big open world games we love. With this SSD, moving between areas could be like seamless. Imagine exploring this giant world and there's no loading screens to break the immersion.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like watching a movie, right? If it's constantly buffering, it's annoying, but when it streams perfectly, you get so much more into it.
Exactly. And TechWise Corner said this could even lead to new gameplay mechanics, new ways to design games that we haven't even thought of yet.
That's what I love about new tech. It always opens up these creative possibilities that we didn't even know were there. Did they give any examples, like how this could actually work in games?
They mentioned games could have these massive dynamic environments where things change in real time based on what the player does, like a more responsive, interactive world.
Wow, that sounds awesome. It'd be like, in a movie when the environment is collapsing around you, but now you're in control and you can change it.
Exactly. It's like blurring the lines between games and reality.
Yeah.
And TechWise Corner thinks the PS5 is going to be huge in making that happen.
That's so cool. It really sounds like this digital edition isn't just a new console. It's like a window into the future of gaming.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. It's a big jump forward, technology-wise and for creativity, too.
Okay, let's talk about something TechWise Corner seemed really into. The 3D audio on the PS5.
Oh, yeah, they loved it. They said it was like getting your ears upgraded, like being able to hear exactly where sounds are coming from in the game. Adds a whole new level of realism.
I've always thought sound design is so important in games, but this 3D audio sounds like it takes things to a whole other level. Did they give any examples of how much of a difference it makes?
Yeah, they mentioned this moment in The Last of Us Part 2 where they could hear this super faint creaking sound, like from a floorboard above them.
Yeah.
Just added to the tension of the whole scene. It's like the sound is all around you, pulling you into the game.
Whoa, that's giving me chills just thinking about it. I can only imagine how good that would be in a horror game or even a stealth game where you have to listen carefully.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And they also said 3D audio makes those subtle environmental sounds better too, like the wind in the trees or the distant sounds of a city. It makes it all feel more real.
So 3D audio, it's not just a gimmick, it's like a whole new way to experience sound in games.
Absolutely. And TechWise Corner thinks it's going to become a really important part of how games are designed from now on.
Okay, let's move on to another big feature, the DualSense controller. I remember TechWise Corner being totally amazed by it. What was it that impressed them so much?
Oh, they couldn't stop talking about the adaptive triggers and the haptic feedback. They said it's like You could actually feel the game in your hands. Like they could feel the tension of a bowstring in Horizon Forbidden West or the rumble of different surfaces when driving in Gran Turismo 7.
So it's not just like a simple vibration, it's these subtle, specific feelings that match what's happening on screen.
Exactly. And TechWise Corner said it actually changes how you play. Like the adaptive triggers can make aiming and shooting more precise, and the haptic feedback makes your actions feel more powerful.
So the DualSense is more than just a controller, it's like a key part of the whole PS5 experience.
Totally. It's not just controlling the game, it's feeling it.
We talked about going all digital with the digital edition and some of the things to worry about, like internet outages and not really owning the games. But TechWise Corner did mention some advantages too.
Oh, for sure. They talked about how convenient it is to download games instantly. No going to the store, no waiting for deliveries. You can just browse the PlayStation Store, pick a game, and start playing right away.
Yeah, I've got to admit, being able to play a game right away is pretty tempting.
Yeah.
And didn't TechWise Corner say something about your game library being available on different consoles?
Yeah. They said your digital games are linked to your PlayStation Network account, so you can play them on any PS5 just by signing in.
That's a great feature. So you could easily go between playing at home and at a friend's house, or even share a console with family without needing the discs.
Exactly. It gives you way more flexibility than physical games.
One thing that makes me a little unsure about going all digital is that digital games can be more expensive than physical copies. Did TechWise Corner talk about that at all?
They did. They said digital games often don't have those big price drops and sales that you see with physical copies, especially used games.
Yeah, I love finding those cheap used games. It's a bummer to miss out on that with digital.
I get that. It's definitely a trade-off. But TechWise Corner also said that the PlayStation Store does have sales and discounts, and you can find good deals on digital games if you're patient and keep checking.
Okay, that's good to know. So being smart about buying digital games is a little different.
Yeah, it's about knowing when the sales usually happen and using wish lists and those notification systems to grab deals when they pop up.
So even though there are some downsides to digital, there are some good things too. It's all about figuring out what works best for you, right?
Exactly. And TechWise Corner did a really good job of explaining both sides. They didn't hide the problems, but they also talked about how convenient and easy digital gaming is.
Okay, let's talk about something else I think is interesting and maybe a bit controversial. Do you think cloud gaming could completely replace consoles someday? TechWise Corner kind of hinted at that.
They did. They thought the digital edition, with its focus on digital downloads and streaming, could be like a first step towards consoles becoming more like streaming devices for games.
I've been thinking about that a lot lately. Imagine not needing a fancy, expensive console to play the newest games. You just pay for a streaming service and play whatever you want on any device that has internet.
That's a pretty wild thought, right? And TechWise Corner seemed to think it could really happen, especially as internet gets faster and cloud gaming tech gets better.
It would change everything about the gaming industry. Developers wouldn't have to worry about hardware limitations anymore. Gamers wouldn't be stuck with certain consoles or platforms. It would be like total freedom.
I agree, it sounds amazing. But TechWise Corner also said there are still some big challenges to overcome before cloud gaming can really take over.
Yeah, like lag, servers crashing, and maybe even higher subscription costs. And don't forget about data caps. If you're streaming all your games, you're going to use a ton of data every month.
All good points. It's not as easy as just moving everything to the cloud overnight. There's the infrastructure, the technology, and even figuring out how to make money from it.
So even though cloud gaming has huge potential, it's going to take time. It's going to be a gradual change. And consoles like the digital edition are probably going to be part of that.
I think you're right. We're not going to suddenly stop using discs and jump straight to cloud gaming. It's going to be a process, and the digital edition is one step in that direction.
It feels like we're at the beginning of something big for gaming, but we're not sure exactly what it's going to look like yet.
Totally. And it's exciting to see where it all goes. Who knows what awesome games we'll be playing in the future.
Before we move on to the last part of our deep dive, let's get back to that storage issue. With the digital edition, storage becomes even more important, right?
Absolutely. TechWise Corner talked a lot about the different storage options you have with the digital edition.
They said that even though 825 GB sounds like a lot, you only really have about 667 GB for games. And with new games being like 50 GB or bigger, that space can disappear fast.
They really emphasized that people who go all digital need to be aware of this and plan ahead. They said you either need to be good at managing your games Or think about getting more storage.
We talked about upgrading the storage with a compatible SSD, but they did say it's not super easy, right?
Right, you need to know a bit about computers to do it, and it might not be for everyone. They recommended looking at Sony's guides or even asking someone who knows about computers to help if you're not sure.
And for people who don't want to mess around inside their consoles, they also suggested using those external USB drives for PS4 games. It's a good way to make space for PS5 game without losing your old ones.
Yeah, it's like creating an archive for your older games so they don't take up space on your main console.
Exactly. It's a smart way to use your storage space better. Didn't TechWise Corner even give some tips for organizing your games better?
Yeah. They said you can use the PlayStation app to manage downloads and free up space remotely. And they recommended using cloud saves, so you can delete games without losing your progress.
Those are good tips. It sounds like TechWise Corner really wanted to give people all the info they need to manage storage, even with the digital edition.
Definitely. They knew storage was a big concern for people going all digital, so they gave a lot of info and advice about it.
Well, I think we've covered a lot in this second part of our deep dive. We've talked about how the PS5's tech could change game development, how cool the 3D audio is, the awesome features of the DualSense controller, and what the future of digital gaming and cloud streaming might look like.
It's been a really interesting conversation, and I think we brought up some important questions about the future of gaming.
Totally. But there's still more to discuss. In the final part of our deep dive, we'll hear what TechWise Corner ultimately concluded about the PS5 Digital Edition and talk about what it all means for gamers like you.
Can't wait to finish this discussion and hear your final thoughts.
Me too. So, stick around for part 3, where we'll wrap up this deep dive.
Okay, so we've spent the last two parts of this deep dive, really getting into the details of the PlayStation 5 Digital Edition, the tech, the design, that awesome controller, and even like thinking about cloud gaming and all that. But now I kind of want to get to the point. TechWise Corner, they obviously put a lot of work into this review. What was their final verdict? Do they think the Digital Edition is like a worthy successor to the PS4?
Yeah, overall, they gave it a really positive review. They were impressed by the performance, the features, the whole experience.
That sums up. But they had to have some reservations, right? Nothing's perfect.
Yeah, they definitely pointed out some potential downsides, mostly about the whole digital-only thing, like no disk drive. That's a big deal for people who buy used games, share with friends, or even watch Blu-rays on their console.
It's that trade-off, right? You get the convenience and it looks cool without the disk drive, but you lose some flexibility. Exactly. And they really stressed how important it is to think about those trade-offs before you decide. Like, what are your gaming habits? What do you like?
Did they say anything about, like, who they think the digital edition is best for?
Yeah, they said it's great for people who mostly buy digital games already, have a good internet connection, and don't care about not having a disk drive. Oh, and they mentioned it's a little cheaper than the regular PS5, so
Yeah,
it could be a factor for some people.
makes sense. It's all about finding what works best for you.
Exactly. TechWise Corner did a great job of explaining the good and the bad, so people can decide for themselves.
Okay, let's talk about storage again. We keep coming back to it. TechWise Corner had a lot to say about the storage options for the digital edition. What were some of their main points?
They said you really got to be aware of how much storage you have and plan ahead. You only get about 667 GB for games out of that 825 GB SSD, and with games being so big these days, that can fill up fast.
Yeah, they said you need to either be really good at managing your games or think about getting more storage, right?
Yep. They talked about upgrading the internal storage with one of those compatible SSDs, which gives you way more space without slowing things down.
Yeah, that sounds like a good option, but didn't they say it's a little complicated?
Yeah, it's not something everyone can do.
Yeah.
They said to check out Sony's guides or ask someone who knows about computers for help if you're not sure.
And if you don't want to mess around inside the console, they say you can use those external USB drives for PS4 games.
Yeah. Make space for the PS5 games without getting rid of your old ones.
It's like moving your old games to a separate shelf so they're out of the way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Smart way to use your storage.
They even gave some tips for organizing your game library better, right?
Oh, yeah, like using the PlayStation app to control downloads and make space even when you're not home. And they said to use cloud saves so you can delete games without losing your progress.
Those are really helpful. It sounds like TechWise Corner really wanted to make sure people knew how to handle the storage situation, even with the digital edition.
Definitely. They knew it was a big deal, so they gave a lot of information and advice.
Okay, so TechWise Corner basically said the digital edition is a good console, but there are some things to keep in mind.
Yeah, they were honest about the downsides of going all digital. But they thought the convenience, how well it performs, and the cool design make it a good choice for a lot of people.
It's about figuring out what's right for you.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
TechWise Corner gave us a lot to think about.
I keep thinking about whether this digital edition is like a preview of a future where everything is cloud gaming. TechWise Corner thought it could happen, but they also said there are still some big challenges.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And we'll probably keep talking about it as technology gets better and the gaming world changes.
Imagine no more consoles in our living rooms, just streaming games from the cloud to any device.
It would be amazing, right?
But,
Everyone could play any game without needing to buy expensive hardware.
but like TechWise Corner said, there are still some things to figure out. Lag, servers crashing, data caps, all that.
And we have to think about what it would mean for game developers and how the whole gaming industry works. It's complicated.
It's like we're at a fork in the road. One way leads to consoles staying on top, the other way leads to this cloud gaming world. Which way will we go? Who knows?
It's a really exciting time to be a gamer. We're seeing so much change and innovation, and the PS5 Digital Edition is a part of it all.
Well, I think that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the PlayStation 5 Digital Edition. We talked about everything from the tech specs to, the big questions about the future of gaming. Thanks again to TechWise Corner for their awesome review. It gave us so much to talk about. And of course, thanks to you, our expert, for sharing your insights.
It was fun.
And to everyone listening, we hope you enjoyed this deep dive and learned something new about the PS5 Digital Edition and the world of gaming. Whether you're a hardcore gamer or just starting out, keep being curious, keep exploring, and most importantly, keep on gaming.